This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
So Ryan very kindly, Ryan Davey, great guitarist from Western, asked if I wanted to borrow the Fender American Ultra Telecaster. So he bought this guitar. It's the very fetching Texas T. I've done another video on it, which was sort of my first 15-20 minutes playing the guitar. And I wanted to do a little bit of a follow-up and a little bit of a comparison with my K-Line Truxton, which is a bit closer in a few ways to something like a Fender vintage style. It's not exact, but it is doing a bit more of the vintage telly thing. I don't have another more vintage telly to compare. In a lot of ways, I feel like the Ultra is a bit of a superior guitar in terms of like ergonomics, or some of them. This belly carve, great. This access to 22nd fret, of course a vintage telly doesn't even have a 22nd fret, but this access, great in terms of playing and actually, you know, having that reachable 22nd fret. It's built with an overhang, so you don't kind of lose out by having a 22 fret style. There's no real compromise there as far as I'm aware. Locking tuners, it's a benefit, and also being able to properly intonate the guitar, although maybe takes away some of the sort of classic telly brassness. I think in terms of actually gigging the guitar, that might not be a bad thing either. One thing that I felt might be a big deal for me is the noiseless pickups. So I actually earlier in the year played some lace sensors for the first time and actually was pleasantly surprised by them. The biggest difference that I'm noticing with these pickups and the more vintage style, these are K-Line signatures, is that these sound a lot fuller in the bass area, and I think you'll agree with that. I did actually do some measurements, and I tried dropping this pickup by about 1 millimeter. It's actually about 1 millimeter closer to the strings than the K-Line was, and although it dropped the output, so these were about 2 dB louder than the K-Line pickups, it came then in line. If I dropped it about 1 millimeter, it was about the same loudness as the K-Line pickup. However, that bass was still there. So that might not be a bad thing as well. So if you listen to them side by side, I think you could either say this sounds kind of muddy in the lower end, or you could say this actually sounds kind of thin. Both are probably true. It depends on what you're looking for, right? And that, I guess, is part of what you might look for, the difference between a modern and a vintage guitar. Of course, you could change the pickups out on this if you weren't necessarily a fan, but I think there's a real benefit to these, particularly if you're recording at home. And I feel like I should probably have a noiseless set of pickups on a guitar somewhere, because, you know, if you sit next to your computer screen at night and play, it's basically very difficult to get decent recordings with single coils. Options around this are maybe like Fender noiseless pickups, which you can get, or you could get Kinmans, or you could get lace sensors, or there are various other options. But I do think the noiseless pickup for me is not a turn off as I thought it might be. To be honest, I think they definitely, if you listen to these clips side by side, you'll hear, first of all, that these have way more bass, and I think you'll also hear that there's way less noise with these, as you'd expect. The thing that does turn me off about the guitar is the neck, though. So the key difference in the neck dimensions is that the modern style Fender necks are actually wider this way, so the strings are further apart than on the vintage style necks. So this is true of the American Pro style neck as well. Now, I think the reason I got on with the American Pro neck a little bit better is because it's kind of a deep C, is what they call that. This is a modern D, and whilst it's not super skinny, it is pretty slim, and combined with the wideness, you definitely get a bit more of that modern feel. Whereas for me, what's going on with this guitar is that you've got it's called the medium C neck, but I think it's probably fairly close to the Fender deep C, where it's actually quite a handful, not the baseball bat thing, but where you've got a substantial amount of neck in your hand. That for me is what I'm used to, as well as the strings sort of placed closer together, like on the vintage style neck. I find it a little bit strange to go to something a bit flat and a bit wider spaced as the Fender Ultra is. For me, I feel like that is the deal breaker. But for you, if you don't like Fender spacing, you know, on their vintage style guitars, that's exactly what this sort of thing is for, right? You've got, you know, strings that aren't so close together and cramped, and you've got a neck which maybe isn't so chunky. So it could work for loads of people. Obviously, I presume they workshop this sort of stuff and do focus groups and, you know, get opinions of people, as well as making plenty of guitars which are a bit closer to the vintage spec. Of course, they still make all of those. So that's the good news. I don't know whether you could swap out a neck on this, because you've got a bit of a strange configuration at the heel here. So I think the Ultra, you're going to be stuck with that type of neck, right? You can't just switch in a normal tele neck, as far as I could tell. That's the part of the Ultra that doesn't really work for me. The chunky frets as well are maybe not exactly what I'd go for in a tele. The compound radius, again, is not a thing I've particularly noticed. I think it's 10 to 14 inches. This is a bit closer to a custom shop in that it's 10 inches all the way. I think typically a Fender Custom Shop Telly would be a 9.5, unless you spec it to be the vintage like 7.25, which is not ideal, I don't think, for me. I think the 9.5 to 10 is kind of the ideal spec there. So those are just some thoughts. I wanted to just put up a comparison there so that you could kind of hear the difference, if you feel like there is a difference between that type of pickup, a noiseless pickup, and a more vintage style pickup. And that for me is why the Ultra wouldn't necessarily work. I think that neck shape and the neck width for me just doesn't quite do it, I think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Other than that, very well built, not heavy, and very nice dark rosewood used, so it's generally very good news. And I think if you get on with that neck, you're going to probably love the Ultra, and could be a great gigging machine. As well as in that middle position, you can have your kind of humbucker telly sounds. You don't have to mess with a 4-way switch. I think all in all, a very nice guitar, and looks the business too. So yeah, thanks Ryan for letting me check that out, and that's why I wouldn't buy a Fender Ultra. But if you're looking for a more modern type telly, that's obviously what it's for. Less cramped on your hands, wider neck, and some pickups that don't buzz when you get near your screen. Useful stuff.